1,000 feet before his and forced his eyes to mine. Wet nostrils shone in the hard light, and his red eyes jittered, terrified of whatever they saw in that jigsaw mind of his. He'd pulled the trigger, and that brutal truth had finally taken root. The trail had wound its way across his face as we'd talked for the past few hours. His denials had sputtered to a halt, and I'd watched, untouchable, as hope shriveled and died. I'd seen it all before. A sopping wet cough, his right forearm smearing mucus across his cheek. "So that's it then?" he asked. I didn't bother to answer. He was already nodding to himself, and I could see his thoughts as if written in the dank air that hung between us. Life without parole, and him not yet 23. It generally took days for this brutal truth to bore through the bullshit tough guy act that every dumbass killer carried into this place like some kind of sick birthright. Maybe this joker was smarter than I'd given him credit for. In the brief time since the judge handed down his sentence, he'd grown the lifer's stare. 50, maybe 60 years behind the same red brick walls. No chance of parole. Not 20 years, not 30 or even 40, but life, in caps. It would kill me, and that is God's own truth. A glance at my watch told me I'd been in there for almost 2 hours, which was my limit. I knew from experience that the smell had by now permeated my clothes, and I could see the dampness where his hands had pawed at my jacket. He saw the watch come up, and he lowered his eyes. His words evaporated in the still air, leaving a vacuum that my body settled into as I stood. I didn't reach to shake his hand, and he didn't reach for mine, but I noticed a new palsy in his fingers. He was old before his time, all but broken at 23, and what might have been sympathy wormed into a heart I'd thought forever beyond such things. He started to cry, and his tears fell to the filthy floor. He was a killer, no question. But he was going to hell on earth first thing the next morning. Almost against my will, I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't look up, but he said that he was sorry, and I knew that this time he truly was. I was his last touch with the real world, the one with trees. All else had been pared away by the razor-sharp reality of his sentence. His shoulders began to heave beneath my hand, and I felt nothingness so great it almost had physical weight. That's where I was when they came to tell me that my father's body had finally been found. The irony was not lost on me. The bailiff who escorted me out of the Rowan County Jail and to the office of the district attorney was a tall, wide-boned man with gray bristles where most of us have hair. He didn't bother to make small talk as we wound through the halls packed with courthouse penitents, and I didn't push it. I'd never been much of a talker. The district attorney was a short, disarmingly round man who could turn off his eyes' natural twinkle at will. It was an amazing thing to watch. To some, he was a politician, open and warm. To others, he was the cold, lifeless instrument of his office. For a few of us behind the curtain, he was a regular guy. We knew him and liked him. He had taken 2 bullets for his country, yet he never looked down on people like myself, what my father had often called the soft underbelly of a warless generation. He respected my father, but he liked me as a person, and I'd never been sure why. Maybe because I didn't shout the innocence of my guilty clients the way most defense lawyers did, or maybe because of my sister, but that was a whole different story. "Work," he said, as I entered the room, not bothering to get up. "I'm damn sorry about this. Ezra was a great lawyer." The only son of Ezra Pickens, I was known to a few as Jackson Workman Pickens. Everyone else liked to call me Work, which was humorous, I guess. "Douglas," I nodded, turning at the sound of the office door closing behind me as the bailiff left. "Where'd you find him?" I asked. Douglas tucked a pen into his shirt pocket and took the twinkle from his eye. This is unusual work, so don't look for any special treatment. You're here because I thought you should hear it from me before the story breaks." He paused, looked out the window. "I thought maybe you could tell Jean." "What does my sister have to do with this?" I asked, aware that my voice sounded loud in the cramped, cluttered space. His eyes swiveled onto me, and for a moment we were strangers. "I don't want her to read about it in the papers, do you?" His voice had chilled. The moment had not played well. "This is a courtesy call, work. I can't go beyond the fact that we found his body." "It's been 18 months since he disappeared, Douglas, a long damn time with nothing but questions, whispers, and the looks that people give when they think you can't tell. Do you have any idea how hard this has been?" "I'm not unsympathetic, work, but it doesn't change anything. We haven't even finished working the crime scene. I can't discuss the case with a member of the defense bar. You know how bad that would look." "Come on, Douglas. This is my father, not some nameless drug dealer." He was clearly unmoved. "For God's sake, you've known me my whole life." It was true. He had known me since I was a kid, but if there was any cause for sentiment, it failed to reach the surface of his lightless eyes. I sat down and rubbed a palm across my face, smelling the jailhouse stink that lingered there, and wondering if he smelled it too. "We can do the rounds," I continued in a softer tone, "but you know that telling me is the right thing. We're calling it murder work, and it's going to be the biggest story to hit this county in a decade. That puts me in a tough spot. It'll be a media frenzy. I need to know, Douglas. This has hit Jean the hardest. She's not been the same since that night. You've seen it. If I'm going to tell her about our father's death, I'll need to give her some details. She'll want them. Hell, she'll need them. But most of all, I need to know how bad it is. I'll need to prepare her. Like you said, she shouldn't read it in the paper." I paused, took in a breath, and focused. I needed to visit the crime scene, and for that I needed his agreement. Jean needs to be handled just right. He steepled his fingers under his chin, as I'd seen him do 1,000 times, but Jean was my trump, and he knew it. My sister had shared a special friendship with the DA's daughter. They'd grown up together, best friends, and Jean was in the same car when a drunk driver crossed the center line and hit them head-on. Jean suffered a mild concussion. His daughter was nearly decapitated. It was one of those things, they said, and it could just as easily have been the other way round. Jean sang at her funeral, and the sight of her could pull tears from Douglas's eyes even now. She'd grown up under his roof, and apart from myself, I doubted that any one person felt her pain the way Douglas did. The silence stretched out, and I knew that my arrow had slipped through this one small chink in his armor. I pressed on before he could think too much. "It's been a long time. Are you sure it's him?" "It's Ezra. The coroner is on scene now, and he'll make the official call, but I've spoken with Detective Mills, and she assures me that it's him. I want to see where it happened." That stopped him, caught him with his mouth open. I watched as he closed it. "Once the scene is cleared, now, Douglas, please." Maybe it was something in my face, or maybe it was a lifetime of knowing me and 10 years of liking me. Maybe it was Jean after all. Whatever the reason, I beat the odds. 5 minutes, he said, and you don't leave Detective Mills's side. Mills met me in the parking lot of the abandoned mall where the body had been found, and she was not pleased. She radiated pissed off from the bottom of her expensive shoes to the top of her mannish haircut. She had a pointed face, which emphasized her look of natural suspicion. Because of this, it was impossible for anyone to find her beautiful, but she had a good figure. She was in her mid-30s, about my age, yet lived alone and always had. Contrary to speculation around the lawyer's lounge, she wasn't gay. She just hated lawyers, which made her okay in my book. "You must have kissed the DA's ass to get this work. I can't even believe I've agreed to it." Mills stood only 5'5" or so, but seemed taller. What she lacked in physical strength, she made